My family has a tradition. Everyone, regardless of gender, must hide their identity and never reveal their family background. Only the first descendant to conceive a child earns the right to return home and take over the family business. I was the first in the entire family to get pregnant. The moment I found out, I was so excited. I ran home without even putting on my coat. With this child, I could finally stop hiding our poverty from my husband, Ethan Moore. But when I got home and opened the door, I found my husband kissing another woman on the sofa. Ethan held the half-dressed woman and looked at me. "Blair's back. Let's get a divorce." I shoved the pregnancy test back into my pocket. The divorce agreement is on the table. There's a pen next to it. Ethan's tone was flat. Blair slowly straightened her clothes, her neck covered with intense kiss marks. I walked over and picked up the agreement. 3 pages densely written. The house goes to Ethan. Company shares go to Ethan. Savings go to Ethan. The car goes to Ethan. I get nothing. I leave with nothing. Ethan finally looked at me. The agreement includes compensation, $30,000. That's not nothing. $30,000. I've been married to this man for 3 years. $10,000 per year. The phone in my pocket pressed against the pregnancy test, jabbing painfully into my thigh. I plan to come home and tell him, "Ethan, we're having a baby. You won't have to lose sleep over rent anymore. Have to grovel and drink with clients until you get stomach bleeding. I thought today would be our best day. Where's the pen?" Ethan pointed to the coffee table. I crouched down to get the pen. From this angle, I could see Blair's hand resting on Ethan's waist. When I uncapped the pen, the pregnancy test nearly slipped out of my pocket. I quickly pressed it back in. "Sign on the last page, date it today." Ethan's voice came from above. I signed my name, Vivian Stone, put down the pen and stood up. "Fine. The agreement needs to be filed at the courthouse to take effect. Tomorrow morning at 9. I'll come find you." After speaking, Ethan picked up his phone and unlocked it right in front of me. Scrolling to his contacts, he changed my label from my darling wife to Vivian Stone. Then he closed his phone and put it back in his pocket. Ethan actually turned and went into the kitchen. 3 years and he'd never cooked for me. Once I'd asked him if he could cook. He said no, said he couldn't even fry an egg without burning it. I went back to the bedroom and grabbed my important documents and a cloth bag containing a few things I brought from home when I got married. Things that had nothing to do with Ethan. When I came out and passed the kitchen, Ethan was cutting tomatoes. The knife thumped against the cutting board. He didn't look up. I changed my shoes at the door. Blair followed and leaned against the door frame. "Vivian, I don't know if I should say this." "Go ahead." "When Ethan's with me, he never sighs. In these 3 years with you, I've heard him sigh so many times on the phone." She lowered her head, her voice soft. "Maybe you two really aren't compatible." I looked at her. Ethan sighed because of broken funding chains, clients backing out, the company nearly collapsing. Every crisis, I've been the one supporting him from behind. After he sighed, the next day he'd wake up and the problem would be solved. He thought it was luck. "You're right." I bent down to tie my shoelaces. "We're not compatible." "You're right." I bent down to tie my shoelaces. "We're not compatible." The moment the door closed, Blair, his voice came from inside. "Ethan, let's change the door lock code. I want to set it to our anniversary." I moved into a studio apartment near the university that rented for $300 a month. Next door was a restaurant. Cooking oil fumes seeped in through the window cracks. I sat on the hard bed and stared at the pregnancy test for a long time. 2 bright pink lines piercingly clear. The next morning, Ethan's mother called Vivian. "Have you finished packing?" "I'm packing." "Don't bother with those clothes of yours. They're nothing special anyway. Also those pickles you used to make. Blair said they're pretty good. She wants the recipe." I'd made pickles for 3 years. Ethan ate them every day. My mother-in-law had never praised them once. "I'm not giving it to her." "What kind of attitude is that?" Her mother-in-law immediately changed her tone. "You're already divorced and you're still being petty. Blair's family has real status. She's doing you a favor by asking for your pickle recipe." "What status?" "Blair's parents run an import-export company in New York. Not everyone's a supermarket cashier like you." Her mother-in-law lowered her voice. "Vivian, I'll be honest with you. I was never really satisfied when Ethan married you in the first place." Not giving her the pickle recipe. "Do you have anything else to ask?" My mother-in-law hung up angrily. Half an hour later, Ethan sent a message. "My mom says you had a bad attitude. We're already divorced. Don't make this uglier than it needs to be." I didn't reply. I turned my phone face down on the bed and touched my stomach. In 3 months, I'd start showing. By then, I'd return to the family as the only heir, who'd successfully conceived and take over everything. Ethan's company that he'd worked so hard to build was worth $3 million. In front of the Stone family. That wasn't even pocket change. The day my prenatal test results came back, I sat on a bench in the hospital corridor in a daze. The doctor said everything was normal. The baby was healthy and told me to watch my nutrition and rest. The baby is healthy. I repeated those words 3 times. Vivian. I looked up. Blair stood at the end of the corridor holding a bag of fruit. She smiled and walked over. What a coincidence you're at this hospital, too. What are you doing here? Visiting a friend. She sat down next to me and casually glanced at my hands. I turned the test results face down. But her eyes had already caught something. Obstetrics. Blair's tone changed. No longer that sweet enthusiasm. She stared straight at my face. Vivian, you're not. It's none of your business. Pregnant. I stood up. Blair. This isn't your concern. Of course it's my concern. She stood up too. If it's Ethan's child, then it is my business. People were passing back and forth in the corridor. She lowered her voice and moved closer. Vivian. Are you planning to hide this from everyone and have the baby? And then what? Use the child to threaten Ethan? I don't need to threaten anyone. Blair watched my reaction as if confirming something. She pulled an envelope from her bag and handed it to me. What's this? Open it. Inside the envelope was an ultrasound report. With Blair's name at the top. Dated 2 weeks ago. It clearly stated intrauterine early pregnancy. 7 weeks. I'm pregnant too. Blair put away her smile and looked at me seriously. Ethan already knows. He's thrilled. He bought a ton of pregnancy supplies. So you understand now his first child can only be born to me. Stared at that ultrasound report. 7 weeks pregnant. Blair had only returned to the country yesterday. 7 weeks ago, she was abroad. This ultrasound had the stamp of the city's maternal and child health hospital. The timeline didn't match. But I said nothing. Now wasn't the time to expose her. Think about it. Blair patted my shoulder before things get messy. She turned and left. I clutched that ultrasound report. You say you're pregnant too. 7 weeks ago you were abroad. But the ultrasound has this city stamp. Blair, what the hell are you? The next day at 10 a.m., Ethan appeared at the door of my studio apartment. I know. He stood outside. His expression complicated. Not angry, more like a kind of patronizing helplessness. Know what? That you're pregnant. Blair told me she hadn't kept her promise after all. Ethan walked in and looked around the room. Less than 100 square feet. And frowned. Vivian Stone. What are you planning to do with this child? Have it. Have it. And then what? His voice rose slightly. You make $3,500 a month. You can barely support yourself. You don't need to worry about me. I'm worried about myself. Ethan sat on the only plastic chair. Hands clasped. Blair's pregnant too. You know that, right? She's further along than you already. 7 weeks she showed me the ultrasound, right? Ethan nodded. Let me be clear. My first child should be with Blair. Yours isn't appropriate. Ethan Moore. Are you sure you want me to abort your child? We're already divorced. Even if you have this child, it'll be a single-parent family. That's not good for anyone. He stood up. Get an abortion. I'll pay for the procedure and nutrition costs. Is $50,000 enough? The door was pushed open from outside. My mother-in-law. She walked in carrying a plastic bag and looked around. This is where you're living. My mother-in-law put the plastic bag on the table. There's $20,000 in there for the abortion. Plus the $30,000 from Ethan. That's $50 total. Enough for you to start over. I told you I'm keeping the child. My mother-in-law's face darkened. Vivian, don't be ungrateful. You know what Blair's family is like. She's Ethan's legitimate wife. You're carrying a bastard. This isn't a bastard. It's Ethan Moore's child. If my son doesn't acknowledge it, then it isn't. My mother-in-law's voice rose. You think getting pregnant means you can latch onto our family? Vivian Stone. I'll say this one last time. Ethan didn't look up from his phone. Get rid of the child, and we'll part on good terms. If you don't, I'll go to court and apply for a paternity test and fight for custody. I have a house and a company. You have nothing. The court will award me the child, and then I'll let Blair raise this child. Let Blair raise my child. That sentence was like a knife dabbing precisely into me. My mother-in-law pushed me. Did you hear? Don't think pregnancy gives you leverage. You're nothing. In front of us. Ethan's phone screen lit up. A message from Blair popped up. I glimpsed a line of text. Ethan, is it handled? I bought your favorite cheesecake. Ethan replied, locked the screen. Looked up at me waiting for my answer. My mother-in-law stood beside him with her arms crossed. Like a supervisor. I touched my stomach. This child was the Stone family heir. The child my entire family had waited over a decade for. Ethan wanted to fight for custody. He had no idea who he was challenging. I took out my phone and found a number I hadn't called in 3 years. I dialed. It was answered after one ring. Dad, come pick me up. I'm pregnant. Ethan and my mother-in-law both looked at me. My father's voice came through the phone very calm. But every word carried undeniable weight. Give me 20 minutes. I hung up. Ethan frowned. Who did you call? My father. My mother-in-law laughed mockingly. Your father? Didn't you say your father was a farmer in the countryside? Calling some old farmer to back you up? I put my phone back in my pocket. Ethan Moore, you just said you want to fight for custody. That's right. Fine, then wait. The studio apartment was suffocatingly quiet, save for the rhythmic ticking of the cheap wall clock. 20 minutes. Ethan checked his Rolex, a gift I had bought him with my saved-up grocery money. For his 30th birthday. He sighed that familiar, patronizing sound. Vivian, this is ridiculous. Who is coming? Some guy from your village with a pickup truck to move your garbage? I have a 10:30 meeting. Then leave, I said, leaning back against the cheap mattress. Oh, we're not leaving until we get this settled. My mother-in-law sneered, crossing her arms. She kicked at a loose floorboard with her designer shoe. I want to see what kind of family raised a woman who refuses to let go of a wealthy man. I bet your father will beg Ethan for a handout. Before I could reply, the ground outside literally began to vibrate. It wasn't a loud, obnoxious noise. It was a deep, synchronized hum of massive engines. The noise drowned out the sizzling walks from the restaurant next door. A heavy, rhythmic thudding of boots echoed in the narrow hallway of the apartment building. Bang. The flimsy wooden door wasn't knocked on. It was pushed open so forcefully the hinges screamed. 4 men stepped into the cramped room. They weren't wearing cheap security uniforms. They wore tailored Italian suits, their earpieces discreet, their eyes scanning the room with lethal efficiency. They moved with a terrifying, silent discipline, instantly boxing Ethan and his mother into the corner near the kitchenette. Hey, what the hell is this? Ethan yelled, his voice cracking slightly. He tried to step forward, but one of the men simply turned his head, fixing Ethan with a dead-eyed stare that made my ex-husband freeze in his tracks. Then the crowd of suits parted. My father walked in. Arthur Stone didn't look like a farmer. He wore a bespoke charcoal overcoat, draped over his shoulders, a silk tie perfectly knotted at his throat. His silver hair was swept back, and his presence immediately sucked the oxygen out of the tiny room. He was a man who commanded boardrooms that dictated global markets. Standing in a $300 a month studio apartment, he looked like a god who had accidentally stepped in mud. He didn't look at Ethan. He didn't look at my mother-in-law. His eyes found me. Vivian, my father said, his voice a low, gravelly baritone that commanded absolute obedience. Are you hurt? I'm fine, Dad, I said, standing up. My mother-in-law let out a shrill, nervous laugh. What is this? Did you hire actors, Vivian? Do you think renting some fancy suits and a few thugs scares us? Ethan's company is worth $3 million. My father finally turned his gaze to her. He looked at her the way one might look at a strange, buzzing insect. 3 million, my father repeated quietly. He glanced at his head of security. Marcus, what did we spend on the floral arrangements for the annual gala last month? 4.2 million, sir, Marcus replied without missing a beat. Ethan swallowed hard. His eyes darted from my father's Patek Philippe watch to the distinct, terrifyingly real aura of power radiating from the men in the room. He was a businessman. He knew when he was out of his depth. The blood drained from his face. Sir, I don't know who you are, Ethan started, trying to muster his CEO voice. But Vivian and I are divorced. She's pregnant, and I have a right to. You have a right to breathe my air for exactly 10 more seconds, my father interrupted, his tone conversational but laced with absolute ice. After that, I cannot guarantee your physical safety. My father walked over to me, extending a hand. The car is waiting. The family is assembled at the estate. You are the first, Vivian. You won. I placed my hand in his. I didn't grab my cheap clothes. I didn't grab the pickle recipe. I just walked past Ethan. Vivian. Ethan grabbed my arm. What kind of scam is this? Before Ethan could even blink, Marcus's hand shot out. He didn't punch Ethan, he simply gripped Ethan's wrist and squeezed. Ethan let out a high-pitched yelp, his knees buckling as the pressure threatened to snap his bones. Do not touch the heir to the Stone Consortium, Marcus said softly, releasing him and letting Ethan crumble to the linoleum floor. My mother-in-law was pressed against the counter, pale and trembling, her mouth opening and closing like a landed fish. I looked down at Ethan, who was clutching his wrist, staring up at me with a mixture of terror and utter confusion. You wanted to fight for custody, Ethan. File the papers. I'll be waiting. I walked out the door. Downstairs, the narrow street was entirely blocked off. 6 black Rolls-Royce Phantoms idled in a perfect line, completely shutting down traffic. Neighbors were hanging out of their windows, snapping photos. A chauffeur opened the rear door of the lead car, and I slid into the plush leather interior. My father got in beside me. As the convoy pulled away, I looked out the tinted window. Ethan had stumbled out of the apartment building, watching the line of million-dollar cars disappear down the street. He looked incredibly small. The Stone family estate sat on 300 acres of private land just outside the city. For 3 years, I had lived in a cramped 2-bedroom apartment with Ethan, budgeting our groceries, scrubbing his floors, and secretly using my own allowance to anonymously inject funds into his failing startup just to keep him from having a breakdown. I had played the role of the devoted, poor wife perfectly. The family rule was absolute. Conceal your identity. Build character. The first to bear a child proves they understand the value of life and family above wealth. They inherit the throne. When I walked into the grand hall, my 3 brothers and 2 cousins were waiting. They looked disappointed, but as per tradition, they bowed their heads. "Congratulations, Vivian," my eldest brother Julian said with a resigned smile. "You beat us. The board is ready for you whenever you are." For the next week, I was surrounded by a team of the world's top obstetricians, dietitians, and tailors. The cheap, baggy clothes I wore with Ethan were burned. I was outfitted in custom maternity wear from Milan. But I didn't just rest. I had an empire to run, and I had a few loose ends to tie up. I sat at the massive oak desk in my father's, now my, office at the top of the stone tower, 70 floors above the city. Marcus stood by the door. "Give me the report on more tech," I said, sipping a glass of warm milk. Marcus placed a tablet on my desk. "Ethan Moore's company is facing severe liquidity issues. For the past 3 years, More Tech stayed afloat entirely because an anonymous shell company, which you controlled, was purchasing their surplus software and inflating their valuation. The moment you stopped the auto payments last week, their cash flow evaporated." I smiled thinly. "What about his current projects?" "He has 1 major client left, Horizon Group. If he loses them, he files for bankruptcy by the end of the month." Marcus paused. "Horizon Group is a subsidiary of Stone Consortium, ma'am. Should I have them terminate the contract?" "No," I said, leaning back in my chair. "Let him pitch to them. In fact, upgrade the pitch meeting. Tell Horizon Group to invite Ethan Moore to pitch directly to the parent company. Tell him the new CEO of Stone Consortium wants to hear his proposal personally." Marcus smirked. "Understood. And regarding the woman, Blair?" I tapped my pen against the desk. "She gave me an ultrasound picture. 7 weeks pregnant. The stamp was from the city maternal hospital." "We looked into it," Marcus said, sliding a manila folder across the desk. "Blair is not pregnant. She has a severe gambling addiction and owes approximately $800,000 to creditors in New York. She returned to the city to find a bailout. Ethan Moore was her mark." "The ultrasound?" "Purchased for $5,000 from a corrupt technician at the hospital. Blair's medical records show she had her tubes tied 5 years ago in Los Angeles. She cannot conceive naturally." I opened the folder, staring at the absolute proof of Blair's lie. Ethan had thrown away a billionaire heiress and his actual flesh and blood child for a bankrupt fraud with a fake sonogram. "Keep this quiet," I instructed. "Ethan said he wanted to take me to court for custody. I want him to do it. Let him build his entire case on his delusion." 2 weeks later, Ethan and Blair were desperate. I knew this because I had Marcus monitoring them. Ethan's company was bleeding out. He couldn't pay rent on his office space. His mother had moved into his condo to save money, and she and Blair were constantly fighting. But Ethan thought he had a lifeline. He had received an invitation to pitch More Tech to the legendary Stone Consortium. If he landed this deal, his company wouldn't just survive, it would be worth tens of millions. The morning of the pitch, I wore a tailored white blazer and a matching skirt that perfectly concealed my slight bump. My hair was styled sleek and straight, and a pair of diamond earrings worth more than Ethan's life insurance policy sparkled in my ears. I sat at the head of the boardroom table. The glass walls overlooked the entire city. My executives flanked me, dead silent. At exactly 10 a.m., the heavy double doors opened. Ethan walked in, wearing his best suit, the one I had dry cleaned 100 times. Blair was clinging to his arm, wearing a tight designer dress she had undoubtedly bought on credit, trying to look the part of a successful CEO's wife. Ethan had his head down, organizing his presentation folders. "Thank you so much for this opportunity," he said, his voice dripping with sycophantic eagerness. "More Tech is ready to revolutionize your data infrastructure. If you look at the..." He looked up. His eyes locked onto me. The files in his hands slipped, scattering across the polished mahogany table with a chaotic clatter. Blair froze, her fake smile dissolving into an expression of sheer horror. "Vivian," Ethan whispered. The color drained from his face so fast I thought he might pass out. He looked around the room. The top executives of the city's most powerful corporation were sitting deferentially around me. Ms. Stone, the chief operating officer corrected sharply. You will address our CEO as Ms. Stone. See. Ethan choked out. He stumbled back a step, bumping into Blair. What? What are you doing here? How did you get in here? Are you serving coffee? Even my executives laughed at that. It was a cold, mocking sound. Sit down, Mr. Moore, I said, my voice echoing in the massive room. You came to pitch for a $10 million investment. I'm listening. Ethan's mouth opened and closed. His brain was visibly short-circuiting. Vivian, your dad is a farmer. You lived in a studio apartment. My father is Arthur Stone, I said simply. I lived in that apartment because of a family tradition. I stayed with you because I loved you. But you cured me of that. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the table. You have 5 minutes, Ethan. Pitch your dying company to me. Blair suddenly snapped. Ethan, let's go. This is a setup. She's just trying to humiliate you. Of course I am, I said smoothly. But if you walk out that door, more tech goes into receivership tomorrow at 9 a.m. Your creditors are waiting. So, pitch. Ethan was shaking. The arrogant man who had tossed a divorce agreement at me with a $30,000 severance was gone. He looked like a cornered rat. He tried to speak to read from his slides, but his voice cracked. Every time he looked at me, he saw the billions of dollars he had thrown away for a quick kiss on a cheap sofa. After 2 minutes of agonizing stuttering, I held up a hand. Enough, I said. Your tech is outdated. Your management is weak. And honestly, I don't like your face. The Stone Consortium passes. Ethan gripped the edge of the table, his knuckles white. The humiliation morphed into a desperate, toxic rage. You think you can do this to me? You think, because you're a Stone, you can ruin my life? I still have rights. You're carrying my child. I filed the custody papers yesterday, Vivian. My lawyer is going to tear you apart. I have a stable home. Blair is having a baby too. We can provide a family. You're just a vindictive rich girl. The judge will give that kid to me. I looked at him, completely unfazed. You filed them? Good. I stood up. I'll see you in court, Ethan. The custody hearing was expedited, mostly because my legal team wanted to end the farce quickly. Family courtroom 304 was small, smelling of lemon polish and old paper. Ethan sat at the plaintiff's table with a mid-tier lawyer he had likely hired on credit. Ethan looked smug. His mother sat in the gallery, glaring daggers at my back. Blair was beside her, clutching her stomach in a dramatic show of early pregnancy. I walked in accompanied by my lawyer, David Sterling, the former Chief Justice of the State Supreme Court, who now exclusively handled Stone family matters. The judge, an older woman with a no-nonsense demeanor, looked over the files. Mr. Moore, you are suing for sole custody of the unborn child, claiming the mother is an unfit, unemployed woman with no fixed address. Ethan stood up, adjusting his tie. Yes, Your Honor. Vivian has no job. Lived in a squalid $300 a month apartment. Furthermore, my fiancée Blair is also pregnant. We can offer a stable, 2-parent, dual-income household. Vivian is unstable and only wants to use the child to extort me. The judge peered over her glasses. Mr. Sterling, your response? Sterling stood slowly, buttoning his suit jacket. Your Honor, opposing counsel's claims regarding my client's financial instability are, historically, inaccurate. He handed a thick-bound folder to the bailiff, who passed it to the judge. My client is Vivian Stone, CEO and sole heir to the Stone Consortium. Her personal net worth is currently estimated at $4.2 billion. She resides in a secure 30,000 square foot estate with a full-time, privately employed pediatric medical staff. I believe she can afford diapers. A pin drop could have been heard in the courtroom. Ethan's mother gasped audibly in the gallery. Ethan stared at his lawyer, who suddenly looked like he wanted to crawl under the table. The judge flipped through the pages, her eyebrows rising higher and higher. Well, this certainly addresses the financial concerns. But Your Honor, Ethan shouted, losing his composure. Money isn't everything. It's a broken home. I have Blair. We are having a child too. The timeline, my child with Blair will be the older sibling. It should be raised together in a proper family. Yes. The timeline, Sterling said, a predatory smile touching his lips. Pulled a second folder from his briefcase. Your Honor, we anticipated Mr. Moore would use Ms. Blair's pregnancy to argue for a stable family unit. Therefore, we took the liberty of subpoenaing Ms. Blair's recent medical records. Objection. Ethan's lawyer squeaked. Invasion of privacy. Overruled, the judge snapped. You brought her pregnancy into this courtroom as a basis for custody. Proceed, Mr. Sterling. Sterling didn't even look at Blair as he spoke. Your Honor, Blair Kensington is not pregnant. She is physically incapable of being pregnant, having undergone a bilateral tubal ligation 5 years ago. Blair shot out of her seat in the gallery. That's a lie. Sterling handed the documents to the bailiff. Included are the surgical records from Los Angeles. Also included is an affidavit from a Dr. Henry Vance who admits to accepting a $5,000 bribe from Ms. Kensington to forge a 7-week ultrasound document. Dr. Vance was arrested by the medical board yesterday. Ethan froze. He turned his head slowly to look at Blair. Blair, what is he talking about? Blair was backing away toward the courtroom door, her face a mask of panic. Ethan, they're framing me. They're rich. They forged this. We also included, Sterling continued loudly over her shouting, Ms. Kensington's financial records. She owes $800,000 to an illegal gambling syndicate in New York. Text messages recovered from her phone indicate she intended to fake a miscarriage next month and blame it on the stress of dealing with my client, all while using Mr. Moore's assets to pay off her debts. You bitch. Ethan's mother suddenly shrieked, lunging at Blair in the gallery. The bailiffs had to physically separate them. Blair burst into tears, turning and bolting out of the courtroom doors, leaving Ethan standing completely alone. Ethan looked like a hollowed-out shell. He looked at the judge. He looked at his lawyer. Then he looked at me. There was no arrogance left. Only the crushing, suffocating realization of what he had done. He had thrown away a billionaire who loved him entirely for a penniless grifter who played him for a fool. Your Honor, Ethan whispered, his voice trembling. I withdraw the petition. Smartest thing you've said all day, the judge deadpanned. Case dismissed. Mr. Moore, do not waste this court's time again. As we walked out of the courthouse, the flashing cameras of the financial press were already waiting. Word had leaked that the new Stone CEO was making her first public appearance. Ethan followed me out, looking ragged. Vivian, he begged, ignoring the cameras. Vivian, please. I was stupid. I was blind. Blair manipulated me. I love you. We can fix this. I'll sign whatever prenup you want. Please let me come home. I stopped at the door of my waiting Maybach. I looked at the man I had spent 3 years caring for. The man who had thrown $30,000 in my face and told me to get an abortion. You don't have a home, Ethan, I said softly, just for him to hear. More. Tax creditors seized your house an hour ago. You're bankrupt. I got into the car. The window rolled up, cutting off the sound of Ethan Moore falling to his knees on the courthouse steps, burying his face in his hands as my mother-in-law wailed beside him. 7 months later, the private hospital wing was quiet, filled with the scent of fresh lilies. I lay back against the plush pillows, looking down at the tiny, perfect face of my newborn son. He had my eyes. The door opened and my father walked in. The terrifying titan of industry looked entirely melted as he gazed at his first grandson. Have you decided on a name? My father asked softly. Arthur, I said. Arthur Stone too. My father smiled, a rare, genuine expression. He will inherit the world. No, I corrected gently, brushing my finger against the baby's cheek. He will be raised with the tradition. He will learn the value of $1. He will learn loyalty. And when he's ready, he will earn his place. As I held my son, I glanced at the muted television on the wall. A brief local news segment flashed across the screen. A tech startup founder had been arrested for attempting to defraud investors after his company went under. They showed a brief clip of Ethan Moore, looking older, disheveled, and completely broken, being led into a police car. I picked up the remote and turned the television off. It was a beautiful day outside, and I had an empire to run.